Taking place from June 16th to 18, 1967, the Monterey Pop Festival was a pivotal moment for the experience, a band that had already gained recognition and popularity in Britain and Europe. Eager to replicate their success in the United States, the band faced challenges as they lacked a record deal and only had a small following through word of mouth. In May, their single Hey Joe was finally released in the US, although it failed to make an impact on the charts. However, a significant turning point came when John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas reached out to the experience. He invited them to perform at the Monterey Pop Festival, an event he was helping organize, which was scheduled for the following month. The catch was that none of the acts, including the experience, would be paid, but their expenses would be covered. The band agreed to participate on the condition that they could bring along Brian Jones to introduce them. The initial concept of the festival was conceived by LA concert promoter Alan Pariser, who envisioned a blend of the San Remo Song Festival's focus on unknown acts and the Newport Jazz Festival. Pariser shared his idea with Ben Shapiro, a seasoned LA showbiz promoter, who liked the concept but not the proposed non-profit nature of the event. They chose Monterey as the festival location, partly because it already hosted an established annual jazz festival and partly due to its convenient location between Los Angeles and San Francisco. On April 11th, the lease for the festival site was signed, and the organizers, Pariser and Shapiro, began reaching out to secure performers. The Mamas and the Papas accepted the invitation, and John Phillips agreed to assist in organizing the event under the condition of maintaining a non-profit approach. Sensing the changing dynamics, Shapiro decided to step back and sold his involvement in the festival. As a result, Phillips and his manager Lou Adler became the festival's directors, with Pariser remaining as the producer. Given the limited time available, the lease was signed, but the town's approval came only in mid-May. The organizers accomplished an impressive feat. However, they were unable to secure a few acts they had specifically hoped for, including the Beatles, due to impracticality. The Stones, some members were embroiled in legal battles. Cream, the Lovin' Spoonful, and the Beach Boys, who initially agreed but withdrew at the last moment. The organizers also struggled to represent a diverse range of current pop music, as only a few exceptions, such as Otis Redding, Jimi Hendrix, and Lou Rawls, represented American black artists. Instead, the festival primarily showcased new-style white rock, with approximately 14 acts performing what could loosely be described as Californian acid rock. For better or worse, the festival, along with the resulting film, served as a springboard for the commercial success of many of these acts and the surrounding counterculture. Notably, the festival played a crucial role in launching the careers of Big Brother and the Holding Company, featuring Janis Joplin, The Who, and especially Jimi Hendrix. As an extension of the pre-existing pre-rock biz events in San Francisco, the Monterey Festival served as a significant continuation of the burgeoning rock music scene in the region. Since 1964, when the Bay Area's music enthusiasts indulged in LSD-infused orange juice and grooved to the sounds of the Warlocks, later known as the Grateful Dead, community events centered around rock music had gained immense popularity in San Francisco. The culmination of these pre-rock biz events was the Human Be-In in January 1967, where thousands of young rock fans flocked to Golden Gate Park to experience the cream of local rock talent, led by Jefferson Airplane. This groundbreaking rock festival attracted significant media attention and proved that mass gatherings of young people didn't have to end in violence and chaos. The presence of Augustus Owsley, California's leading underground chemist, who generously distributed 100,000 free doses of LSD in the park to undercut the black market, likely contributed to the atmosphere of peace and love, even with the Hells Angels in attendance. Observing these developments, entrepreneurs like Shapiro and Pariser recognized two crucial aspects of the new music scene. It attracted a large number of affluent white middle-class youth. With $50,000 in funding secured, they enlisted the help of renowned LA publicist Derek Taylor, who had previously worked with the Beatles to assist in organizing the festival. However, they soon encountered challenges. When John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas declined an offer of $5,000 for the band to perform, Shapiro and Pariser realized that even in 1967, $50,000 was insufficient to create a 3-day music festival featuring popular acts. Phillips had rejected the money due to his reservations about the commercial aspects of the enterprise, feeling it resembled Colonel Parker's style. The Mamas and the Papas, alongside Paul Simon, who was also approached, proposed a different approach, a non-profit festival organized by the artists themselves, with acts performing solely for expenses and the proceeds going to charity. Shapiro and Palliser agreed to this idea. To generate publicity, a board of governors was established, featuring influential figures like Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, Brian Wilson, and Smokey Robinson. While their involvement in the actual organization of the Monterey Festival was minimal, McCartney suggested that the event would not be truly international without the inclusion of Jimi Hendrix. The organizers of the Monterey Pop Festival encountered numerous challenges along the way. The Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco was already filled with disaffected teenagers seeking refuge, which raised concerns for the mayor and police chief of Monterey. John Phillips, with his smooth and attentive demeanor, had to convince them that the festival was intended for an older audience. He assured them that the event would not feature teeny pop bands that could attract young kids or bands that might incite revolution from the stage. This partly explains the unique lineup of the festival, heavily focused on laid-back Californian acts with only a nod to mainstream pop, East Coast bands, and black music. However, this selection sparked resentment among bands from other parts of America who believed the Californian music scene was monopolizing the opportunity for exposure. As a result, agents and managers of big-name acts forced the organizers to include complete unknowns as part of the deal. To be fair, the lack of black acts was not entirely the fault of the organizers. Chuck Berry refused to perform for free, and the hotel in San Francisco that had booked Dionne Warwick would not release her for the show. The Rolling Stones couldn't make an appearance due to Mick Jagger and Keith Richards being denied work permits pending their trials on drug charges. Additionally, the Beach Boys declined to perform, partly due to concerns about the ultimate destination of the proceeds. The festival faced an image problem among California's radical spokespersons, and their concerns were valid. The promoters needed the financial backing of record companies to make the festival possible. In return, Monterey provided the companies with a showcase of unsigned rock talent, giving them the youth credibility they sought. Managers like Chaz and Mike were not enthusiastic about Monterey for idealistic reasons. It was purely a business venture. If Jimmy performed well, they would have an international star on their hands. Meanwhile, the audience believed they were partaking in an event that could revolutionize society, while the executives and managers sought to revolutionize their financial gains. Caught in the middle were the musicians, trying to satisfy everyone's expectations. The influx of attendees began on Thursday, June 15th, with a steady stream of Love people. By Friday, the numbers grew exponentially, causing traffic congestion with cars carrying both curious onlookers and those identifying as hippies, Hell's Angel bikers, and hitchhikers dressed as cowboys or Indians. By the official opening of the festival on Friday evening, approximately 30,000 people had entered the showgrounds, but only 7,500 could access the arena. Over the weekend, the estimated attendance reached 90,000. The police chief had enlisted additional forces, but their services proved unnecessary. They maintained a low profile, virtually disregarded drug use, and most of them stood down before the weekend ended. It was the festival organizers who felt the strain. By Saturday night, Derek Taylor had disappeared entirely, leaving a note on his door stating, "I cannot relate to your problem." However, those present at the festival and subsequent accounts of that weekend describe a wholly benevolent atmosphere. Merely being surrounded by joyous, stoned and laughing faces induced a contact high. People spoke of a sense of tribal connections and a collective unconscious experience. In some ways, the cultural significance of Monterey lay in its audience rather than the music. The audience found a profound sense of enjoyment within itself, and the majority of the 1,200 journalists with press passes were there to observe and report on this phenomenon. On June 4th, as their debut album climbed the charts, The Experience held a farewell concert at the SAVILLE Theatre, marking their last performance before heading to Monterey. Jimi Hendrix thrilled the audience, which included Paul McCartney, by launching into a rendition of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band from their own album that had reached #1 on the charts. Concluding the gig, Hendrix received a guitar for the finale of Are You Experienced and dramatically smashed it, tossing it into the crowd. The back of the white Fender bore a poem penned by Jimi, expressing his emotions of love, confusion, frustration, and his yearning for true artistic expression. In Britain and Europe, Hendrix had already established himself as a talented musician. However, cracking the American market held special significance for him as he was returning to his home country. Unlike other artists who had spearheaded the British invasion since 1964, Hendrix faced the challenge of gaining recognition and success in the United States. The release of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album on June 1, 1967, marked a significant milestone in the emergence of psychedelic music and the cultural movement it represented. While track records had been discreetly shipping copies of Are You Experienced to the growing American underground market, Sgt. Pepper had a profound impact worldwide. On Sunday, June 4th, the experience took the stage at the SAVILLE Theatre, with both Paul McCartney and George Harrison in attendance. The SAVILLE Theatre audience was still absorbing the incredible sounds of Sgt. Pepper, and when Hendrix and his band opened their set with their own interpretation of the album's title track, the crowd erupted in applause. Observers noted the audience's intrigue and curiosity about this talented African-American musician. As Chris Stamp reflected, Hendrix had a magical instinct for playing the right music at the right time. Among the many British pop stars present that night was Graham Nash, who recalled being blown away by Hendrix's performance in a flamboyant orange velvet suit, playing Sgt. Pepper. Paul McCartney, impressed by the experience's rendition, described the show and Hendrix's playing as simply incredible, one of the best he had ever witnessed. McCartney's only regret was that the show, unlike other SAVILLE concerts, was not professionally recorded. The SAVILLE show was a resounding success, culminating in a massive party hosted by McCartney at his house. McCartney had recently agreed to serve on the board of directors for an American pop festival in Monterey, California. Noel Redding, bassist of The Experience, reflected on the SAVILLE show. The SAVILLE show, run by the Beatles manager Brian Epstein, was huge. Hundreds were turned away from the door. It opened with the Stormsville Shakers, chart-topping Procol Harum, the Chiffons, Denny Lane and his electric string band, and we closed it. In spite of amp trouble, as usual, it was a really good, loose show. The speed of our progress made it difficult for us to adjust to our new status. Invited to an after-gig party, I was overwhelmed when Paul McCartney opened the door of Epstein's star-filled home. I spent most of the night just watching people and marveling that I was there. The show at the SAVILLE really capped things off. We'd got the music together, got the recording together, got the audience together, and now it was time to get America together. The Jimi Hendrix Experience's sole American gig was the Monterey Pop Festival, a crucial opportunity in the eyes of Mike Jeffrey, who aimed to solidify his position as the band's manager. While Jimi's talent was undeniable, it was Chandler's tireless efforts that had propelled Hendrix to success in Britain. Chandler, a musician himself, had earned Hendrix's respect. He possessed strong convictions and a clear sense of purpose, qualities that Hendrix desperately needed. However, while Chandler remained devoted to Hendrix, Jeffrey approached the music industry with a realistic mindset. Unlike Chandler, he was not an artist and understood that success or failure in the industry could be swiftly determined. In the 1960s, record royalties alone were insufficient to justify the extensive work required to establish an artist. Jeffrey recognized that touring held the key to unlocking financial success, and he prioritized creating an enigmatic aura and establishing a distinctive image for the band as part of his strategic plan. Upon their arrival in San Francisco on June 15th, the band made their way to Monterey to settle in and prepare for their upcoming performance. According to Chandler, the experience was somewhat taken aback by the wild party atmosphere already in full swing. They stayed at a small motel alongside Eric Burdon and the Animals and the Buffalo Springfield. Despite their differences, the bands had memorable moments together. Chandler fondly recalls, "It was like mixing oil and water, but we had some fantastic times with them." During rehearsals, Hendrix encountered an old acquaintance, Buddy Miles. Miles had become the drummer for the Electric Flag, but their initial meeting had occurred years ago when Miles was just 16, playing with Ruby and the Romantics in Montreal. Hendrix had been passing through as a member of the IB Specials, the supporting band for the Isley Brothers. They had quickly formed a friendship. Miles remembers, Jimmy was from Seattle, a city with both American and Canadian black communities, so he could blend into the mainstream more easily than rural blacks. I was from Omaha, Nebraska, where there was also a good mix of races. At Monterey, Miles had his first glimpse of the Jimi Hendrix experience and was left utterly astonished. Despite the impressive lineup of talented performers set to take the stage at the three-day festival, Jerry Stickles sensed a quiet confidence within the band. He observed that Hendrix thrived on challenges and was thrilled to be back in America. Monterey offered the entire band an opportunity to connect with new people, engage in jam sessions, exchange ideas, and enjoy the festivities. For Jeffrey, it was a golden chance to generate interest in the group and avoid returning to England with little progress made. As the Monterey Pop Festival approached, the members of the experience enjoyed their time as rock stars to the fullest. Noel Redding, seated next to Brian Jones on the flight, experienced his first taste of LSD. According to a report from Keith Ultham in New Musical Express, Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell reveled in the company of various attractive individuals, enjoying the pool and the attention. Among the musicians present, there was a desire to try the infamous purple haze acid, and an intriguing new substance from the House of Owsley, known as STP, also referred to as DOM, and amphetamine-based. Leading up to the festival, Jimmy spent much of his time in the company of Brian Jones, Eric Burdon, and Buddy Miles. Jimmy and Buddy had a long-standing connection. Amidst socializing with fellow musicians, soaking up the atmosphere, and enjoying themselves, Jimmy had one specific task in mind: to acquire another Fender Stratocaster for his stage performance. Unable to find one in New York or San Francisco, he eventually discovered what he wanted in Monterey. On Sunday, outside his motel room, Jimmy captivated Eric Burdon's attention. Adorned in a silver conch belt, calf-length boots, and a gypsy waistcoat, he crouched in the sun, surrounded by his guitars and a box of colored inks and oils. It was a solitary scene reminiscent of a Navajo warrior preparing for the hunt. Displayed before him were 4 Fender Stratocasters. Eric witnessed Jimmy paint black swirls on one white Fender and yellow on another. One of these guitars would serve as the sacrificial centerpiece of that night's performance. Sharing some marijuana, Jimmy expressed his excitement for the upcoming show, remarking on his heightened state and nerves. He proclaimed, "The spaceship is really going to take off tonight." In the afternoon, Jimmy took it easy, sitting among the audience and absorbing the inner calm of Ravi Shankar, the master musician. A minor conflict arose later when Jimmy engaged in a frank discussion backstage with Pete Townshend regarding the order of performances. Eventually, John Phillips settled the matter by flipping a coin, and Jimmy lost. The experience would follow The Who. By the time Monterey Pop Festival arrived, San Francisco and its vibrant music scene had already become an international sensation. The term Summer of Love was entering common parlance. The roots of the scene could be traced back to the Gold Rush era, when the city's founding fathers established an ethos of tolerance that persisted. The beatnik culture of the 1950s, with influential writers like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, had a significant impact, particularly in the North Beach area renowned for its coffeehouses, jazz clubs, and bookstores. In the early 1960s, the beatnik culture began to fade, but a new wave of radical and countercultural activity emerged with the revival of folk music. Many folk musicians initially held disdain for the popular music of the era, but with the arrival of the British invasion, led by the Beatles in late 1964, they realized the potential of electric music. As a result, numerous Bay Area folk artists formed bands, including Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead, Paul Kantner and the Jefferson Airplane, and David Freiberg and Quicksilver Messenger Service. These first-generation bands were still active in late 1965, blending electric elements with folk and R&B influences. Over the following year, their music evolved into the eclectic hybrid known as the San Francisco Sound. Haight-Ashbury, once a haven for dropouts from SF State College, underwent a transformation in 1966, becoming the largest hippie community in the United States. It became a desired destination for anyone under 21, as it was seen as a perpetual party. However, the reality differed from the ideal, and by the summer of 1967, the area became overwhelmed. Ironically, just as the world discovered its existence, Haight-Ashbury's golden days were drawing to a close. Nevertheless, Many aspects, particularly the music, endured until the end of the decade. The Who's manic stage show did not escape the attention of Jimi Hendrix. Watching from the side stage, a transformation was observed in Hendrix's mood, from nervous fidgeting to total commitment. He hadn't intended to burn his guitar. According to Chandler, the experience had planned to perform their regular set and had rehearsed at the festival site to do just that. But after witnessing the Who's final act of destruction, Hendrix had immediately decided to sacrifice a hand-painted Stratocaster. Just before the group took the stage, Chandler left the performer's tent to join the engineer's Wally Hyder, recording the performance in his 8-track remote truck. After a short introduction by the Rolling Stones' own Brian Jones, for which the experience would be forever grateful, Hendrix, Mitchell and Redding strode on stage together to make their American debut. Having arrived on stage, the band tuned up and waited for Jones to alert the crowd to their presence. Although muffled on the recording, Jimi Plays Monterey, the introduction rang loud and clear to the audience. After the crowd's polite applause, the experience launched into action. Starting with Killing Floor, the band opened their set with a powerful rendition of this blues classic, with Hendrix sporting the eye vest of the still unreleased Reprise Are You Experienced LP and a bright pink feathery scarf. Hendrix unleashed a torrent of one-handed hammer-on notes as his other swung wildly in the air. Foxy Lady, the rendition of which remained very close to the studio counterpart, though somewhat ragged, exploding with nervous energy. As Foxy Lady finished, Hendrix stepped to the microphone and audaciously asked the audience to give him 1 second to get right down to business. As he stripped off his vest and scarf, Hendrix further disarmed the audience, quipping as he held the pink scarf, "I don't want anybody to think I'm, you've got to keep people honest." As he had learned by watching both Johnny Hallyday and classic R&B performers he had backed, a crowd could be set at ease with some self-deprecating humor. Hendrix's aside perfectly set up the next song, a masterful version of Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone. Hendrix's rendition of Bob Dylan's classic song demonstrated his ability to reimagine well-known tunes and infuse them with his unique style, and once again demonstrated the ability to play the right song at the right time. Like a Rolling Stone won the band a warm ovation, and with Rock Me Baby, it was time to ratchet things up again. The band, especially Hendrix, seemed to sense that the crowd was now with them, and he responded by playing the main solo with his teeth and ending the song with a dramatic tremolo finish. Hey Joe, the song that brought us here as Jimi described it, followed next. Injected with the same passion and enthusiasm afforded Like a Rolling Stone, this Monterey rendition was even more powerful than the studio single. Hendrix stayed within tempo, playing the first solo with his teeth and the second one behind his head. As Hendrix stopped to tune up once again, he slyly noted the band's desire to visit New York to see the golden street of the village. The reason they are golden is because of all the banana peels. After this quick dig, Hendrix launched into Can You See Me at breakneck speed, forcing Mitchell with varying success to keep up. This track was not captured by D.A. Pennebaker's film crew in its entirety, for they were reloading the film during the performance. Hendrix quickly introduced The Wind Cries Mary as the next single here, and again settled down the audience with a ballad, this time his own. Purple Haze came next, and once again Hendrix invoked his sense of humor by pointing to Redding and singing, "Excuse me while I kiss this guy." Prefacing the group's final number, Hendrix took time to thank the Monterey audience, then teased them, cryptically declaring his intent to sacrifice something I really love. Calling it the English and American anthem combined, he launched into a feedback-drenched rendition of the Trog's Wild Thing. Hendrix pulled out all the stops, incorporating all of his fabled stage moves, including a wonderfully fitting one-handed version of Frank Sinatra's Strangers in the Night, inside his solo. Hendrix rolled on the floor, cranked his amps as high as he could, and ran toward his bank of amplifiers to begin a vicious frontal assault. While Mitchell continued to pound out fills, Hendrix squatted over his guitar and began to pull the tremolo bar. Incredibly, the sound still maintained an eerie musical quality missing from Townsend's routine. With Hendrix, the act seemed overtly sexual rather than violent, and his relentless grinding, tongue-wagging and showboating left the Monterey audience staggered. Whereas most bands would have appeared feeble after the Who's set, the Experience firmly established themselves as the single most dynamic act in rock. The looks of astonishment on the faces of the crowd, captured by the film crew, are precious. According to Abe Jacob, sound engineer for the Mamas and Papas, the first thing that went through all our minds was that, at last, someone was doing a theatrical show. Up until that point, everybody was laid back, giving a non-show performance. T-shirts, ripped jeans, hair in your eyes, and you looked down at your guitar and played. Critically acclaimed and influential, their performance at the Monterey Pop Festival showcased the raw talent and groundbreaking sound that would make Jimi Hendrix one of the most revered musicians in rock history. It was a defining moment for the band, solidifying their place in music history and signaling the arrival of a new era of rock music. This is how Noel Redding described the Monterey experience. Things weren't coming in half measures. I was flying first class to New York, seated next to Brian Jones, who had taken me under his wing and cruising on a tab of purple Owsley. I was floating and swearing it hadn't affected me at all. What could be trippier than real life? Arriving in New York, I went for a sail on some bloke's yacht and had some more acid. I caught a plane early the next morning, chatted up a stewardess and arrived at 9 o'clock. I had rushed from New York to San Francisco, nervous that I'd missed something. Everyone was convinced that the 3-day Monterey Pop Festival marked the beginning of a new era, somewhere, according to historians, between the age of Aquarius and the age of asparagus. We'd been recommended to the festival committee by Paul McCartney, Andrew Oldham, and Derek Taylor, and our US debut was to be on the final day of the festival. The excitement was almost unbearable. Artists included Simon and Garfunkel, the Byrds, Booker T and the MGs, and many, many more. The exotic crowd ranged from Madras to Velvet. You only had to breathe the air filled with incense and marijuana to be high. Everyone believed something awesome was happening, that some amazing vibration was breaking out. The whole concept of this stupendous concert made everything previous pale into insignificance. On our day, we went to the gig early with The Who for a run-through. Just the fact that we had to follow them filled us with apprehension. Nobody knew how we'd come off. The Who's smashing act had taken America by storm, but we were coming to the audience as total unknowns. Whereas in England, Jimmy's being American had helped us get noticed. It was the Englishness of the group that was being stressed in America. The press played up to our black English guitarist, who could play with his teeth. Suddenly it didn't seem like much. Joe Brown could play Hava Nagila with his guitar behind his head. That night, Brian Jones, blissed out, introduced us to America. Thanks to The Who, the audience was already in a frenzy. We were in fine form, the rapport was perfect, and we flew through a great set. Jimmy finished by burning his guitar. The lighter fluid was being stubborn again, but once it did finally flare up, the audience exploded. Jimmy whipped the flames through the air, demolishing the guitar. Later, when Jimmy started smashing guitars more often because the sound effects were better than burning, he'd use the same re-glued breakaway guitar. It took ages for the crowd to settle for the next act. We'd gone a bomb. Chandler made it to the dressing room after a half-hour struggle through the crowd, getting there just in time to rescue us from preposterous as it seems, a tongue-lashing from Jeffrey. Tut-tut, we'd damaged a mic stand. Brushing such major crimes aside, we talked with Bill Graham about doing a gig with Jefferson Airplane at the Fillmore. Then we plunged into the tons of drink and smoke laid on for the post-gig party. Mitch describes the trip to the US and a chance meeting at Monterey. Both Noel and I had been looking forward to going to the States for the first time in our lives. There we were, first-class seats on TWA. Eric Burden was on the flight, and so was Brian Jones. We landed in New York and were whisked off to the hotel in limos. Noel and I were sharing a room, and first off Noel decides to have a bath. I'm unpacking the case and I hear this screech, and Noel's standing on the side of the bath and I'm going, "What's wrong, what's wrong?" It was our first experience of cockroaches. There were loads of them. Mr. Calm here says, "Don't panic, I'll go into the kitchenette to find some powder or something." So I open the drawer in the kitchen cabinet and it's the wrong move. The rest of the family are in there, thousands of them. Quick phone call to Chaz, "Get us out of here now." We managed to transfer to another hotel, which was okay. I remember that first night we met Deering Howe, an old friend of Chaz's whose grandfather made the combine harvesters. He had this yacht and we were treated very regally. It was an amazing situation, first night in New York, and we're sailing round the Hudson and East River in this yacht, very decadent. After that we flew to San Francisco, stayed a few hours there, and then the next morning we flew on to Monterey. We had a private plane hired by the festival organizers, and among the other passengers was Tiny Tim. We'd certainly never seen anybody like him before, warbling away with his ukulele. After we checked in at the hotel, I went out and looked over the site, and I was amazed at the preparation that had gone into it all. I'd had no idea of how big the event was going to be. I was walking around and it was quiet, just people setting up equipment. I had some strawberries, and as I was eating them, this guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, they look nice, can I have one?" I replied, "Sure, here you are." He said, "That's very kind of you. Open your hand. In fact, put both your hands out. In fact, put the strawberries down." I'm not sure what's going on, but I put them down and he puts this gigantic quantity of these purple pills into my hands. Of course, it's Owsley, the legendary acid chemist. I had heard of him and knew of his reputation, but I wasn't sure what to do with these things, so I just stuffed them in my pocket, said thank you, and walked off.